this video I'm going to look at building a female android. As you may have noticed, many of my previous videos have involved building robots, mostly mechs, but I've also built a few humanoid robots as well, so I wanted to continue that theme. So for this project I want to build each of the individual parts of the robot separately. I can then cast them up in resin and then kit bash and add additional found objects on top of those parts. I also want to pay particular attention to the abdomen, so I want to be able to see the robot's spine, have some pistons in there and plenty of cabling, and also have some interesting lighting effects too. So that's the basic plan for this project. Now I want this project to be quite large scale and quite impressive, so because this is going to be quite a large model, what I need is a plan to work to. Each piece is going to be sculpted separately, so I think I run the risk of getting proportions out of size and becoming a bit derailed if I don't have something to work to. So what I've done is to grab this anatomical picture of a figure and I've started tracing around it in Illustrator. What I want to do is create an outline that I can then print out and use as a plan for my model. So now that I have that printed out, I can now cut out the shapes that I need and start using those as a guide for the sculpture. Now the idea for this really came from my previous mech project. In that I started adding some sculptures to the mech. Sculpture is one of the main things I do, and I wanted to see if there was a way of combining sculpture and sort of organic forms with the more hard-edged modelling that typically is used in mech building. I was quite pleased with the way that one came out, so I started thinking, well, can I develop that further? So I started wondering whether I could actually sculpt a hard-edged model. Sculpting things that are very geometrically precise is really difficult, so I've always shied away from doing it. But that's what I'm going to try and do here. Sculpt the basic organic shapes of the figure in Sculpey. I'm going to cook them hard, then start sanding to get the smooth surfaces I need. I can then use some found objects and various other pieces like bits of plastic to start adding in mechanical detail. So I'm going to start with the torso, and I've cut out the shapes for the front and the back. What I'm now going to do is trace those onto plastic and then start building up the shape of the torso from that. I'm going to be sculpting this in super sculpey, so I'm going to use some tin foil to pack out the interior so it's not one big lump of clay. So now that I've got the basic shape built out, I'm now giving it a layer of Bondo just to give it a hard surface to sculpt against. Now what I'm using is actually going to be a mixture of basic flesh coloured Sculpey and the grey firm Sculpey. So you may have seen me do this before in previous videos. I'm going to use a pasta roller here to combine the two types of Sculpey together. I have a basic female torso sculpted there. What I now want to start looking at is adding in a few mechanical details to it to start giving it a bit of a robotic look. Now a good source that I've found for mechanical pieces is hard drives. So I think these aluminium rings are going to look pretty good for some shoulder joints. So now that I have my basic shape in place, I'm going to actually cook it. So obviously this isn't a finished sculpture yet, I just want to maintain the basic shape. So that's now a solid block of clay, so I can now come in and start sanding this to a smooth finish. So I've got these things which are sanding sponges, and these are quite good because they sort of conform to the contours of the model. I can also now cut away some of the excess Bondo which is protruding from the bottom. Something I'm also using here is this stuff, which is a freeform sculpt, which is an epoxy clay from Smooth On. So I'm just going to use this stuff to fill in some of the gaps in the model where I've added some hard edged pieces to the clay. So I've also got these caps from deodorant bottles, so I'm thinking these might be useful for adding some detail on the back of the model. What I also want to do is sculpt some further mechanical detail on the front of the model using some more sculpey. Now, it can occasionally be difficult to get sculpey to stick to sculpey that's already cooked, so what I do is to add some white spirit, which is also known as mineral spirits in other countries. And I'm smoothing that down as well as I can with sculpting tools, but ultimately I'm only going to get it properly smooth with some sandpaper. So I'm using a heat gun here to cook that thin layer, and that doesn't take very long at all because it's so thin. This is something I've done for previous models. I'm just using a blunted scalpel blade to cut in some panel lines into the model. And with a few pieces of styrene plastic glued on, this is now ready for a layer of primer. So using exactly the same method, I can now go on and start building the other pieces of the robot's body. One thing I did realise as I was doing this is that it was much easier to build the basic shape of the pieces instead of getting bogged down in too much detail. I figured as long as I've got the basic shape in place, I can do all of the kit bashing and detailing after I've actually made the moulds and cast this thing up. Now, one thing I have noticed with this is that sculpting organic forms is quite difficult to get accurate, and in actual fact this is one of the few occasions where I've thought that a 3D printer would actually be useful here. One advantage you have there is that you can simply sculpt one half of the robot and then mirror it on the other side, so I think that would be quite a good way of getting some accurate, at least basic shapes to sculpt over. In this case I'm having to actually just eyeball a lot of this and measure to try and make sure I've got everything more or less even. Nevertheless, when I'm drawing centre lines on this and trying to line pieces up, I am discovering that I haven't got things exactly accurate, so certainly having a 3D model to mirror would have been very, very useful here. So that has got me thinking about maybe getting a 3D printer for future projects. I guess we'll have to see how we go, but I can certainly see a use for it in this case. So we have the beginnings of a leg coming together there. Because I'm building this thing in pieces, it's quite difficult to get an idea of what the overall piece will look like. So I'd occasionally just add all the bits together that I'd built so far, just so I could see that I was moving in the right direction and that things didn't look too disproportionate. This is the beginnings of a foot, which I kind of got a little bit too big. So I had another go at this, and I've just used exactly the same method as I did before again. Cut out some shapes in styrene plastic, built a frame, and then filled in the gaps. In this case I've used Bondo to actually do that instead of Sculpey, and a layer of styrene plastic on the front finishes it off just to add a degree of contouring. Now that I'm more or less happy with the sculpt for the head, I've cooked the sculpture, and what I'm now doing is in the same process I've done for the rest of the body, that is get some sandpaper and start trying to smooth this down. Now because this is quite an organic shape, there's lots of curves, I'm going to use some wire wool in this case, and then proceed to some very fine grained sandpaper to try and get this as smooth as I possibly can. This being a robot, I also need to add some mechanical detailing to it. So as you can see here, I've added some cast resin components on the back. I suppose I'm thinking a little along the lines of Robocop here, something like that. So there's a passing resemblance, I think. In order to get some smooth panels on the sides of the heads, I've cut out the outline of some shapes in styrene plastic and glued those on. Having just the outline allows the shape to follow the contours of the sculpture. I'm then filling in the interior with some smaller strips of styrene and then filling in the gaps with some milliput. So at the time of posting this video, I'm in the process of moulding all of the various components of this robot so I can cast them up in resin. I'll cover that in the next part of the video. But I thought it'd be useful to see all of the individual components put together at least to get an idea of what the robot would look like. Now these things are held together a little bit precariously by various stands and bits of tape, so I was lucky these didn't collapse during filming. But in the next part of the video we'll be looking at moulding all these up, casting them, and then putting them all together. I'm going to be lathing up some brass pieces for various parts of the joints. And I've also been looking at a base for this, and I'm thinking this thing would look pretty cool with some lights underneath and some smoke billowing through the grates. So I'm looking to make this piece quite impressive, hopefully, and I'm even thinking about maybe adding some motion to it as well with some Arduinos and some servos. So that's all to come, but if you've made it this far through the video, then thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be posting more videos on this project and others, so if you'd like to keep up with what's going on, please do subscribe. Alternatively, you can visit my website, which is www.thedarkpower.com, or you can find me on Facebook, just search for The Dark Power.